Cool. All right. What's up, everyone? Thank you so much for joining us. If you are here live, I really appreciate you taking time out of your Thursday night to join us here. And if you are watching the recording, thank you so much for tuning in. I am so freaking stoked to have Steph on here. Steph has been a friend of mine for on Instagram for a long time, and in real life for at least a year and a half, I guess. No, more than that. I don't know,
Yeah, it's
couple
been a
years.
while.
Yeah, we've ran in Crested Butte together, we've ran in Moab together, and now we've ran in Fruita, Colorado together. Steph ran her first 50K race 2 weeks ago now in Fruita, Colorado. And my friend Allison and I were there to help crew her. And then we ran our half marathon the next day. It was super fun, super, super stoked to be there and support Steph and watch her do this. And just really excited to have her come on and talk about it. So with that, Steph, I am going to let you introduce yourself. And then we'll just roll right into some story time and questions.
Awesome. Well, hello everyone. I'm excited to also be here. I'm very excited to be, with the back of the pack this evening. A little bit about me. If you don't know me, you probably know me from Instagram. Laura, I know, tagged me on there a couple of times, if that's where you kind of came and found me from that. So my background of what I actually do in real life, I am a researcher. So I research how nutrition and exercise interventions can help cancer survivors still function and survive. So I do a lot of clinical research. I'm a postdoc right now, so it's kind of like a training position for PhDs where you're essentially like learning to become an independent researcher. So that's like what I do in my day job. And then in my free time, I spent a lot of time in the past year running. So I run, I lift, I do a lot of things like that. So you'll probably find me on Instagram talking about either, again, running, lifting, or a lot about cancer and nutrition and myth busting and that kind of thing is what I typically do on Instagram. But I am excited to talk about my first ultra marathon, which was definitely a great experience, and like the whole training experience and all that kind of stuff. So if you have questions about, I'll give like an overview of the race. But then if you have any questions like while I'm talking about that, again, feel free to like drop them in the chat or anything like that. So
Yeah, for sure. Let me admit Michelle here. So real quick before Steph kind of just dives into an overview of her race story, I would love to hear, you can either, if you're on and you have your video on, which you're able to, I love it when people turn their video on. It's so fun to actually like see the faces of the people that you're talking to. But just like a quick show of hands or drop in the comments if you've ever run an ultra before, and if you have, how did it go? And if you haven't, is this a goal for you coming up? I'd love to kind of just get a feel for like kind of where everyone's at. So raise your hand, drop it in the comments, whatever it is. I just kind of love to hear about that. And then yeah, Steph, um, tell us, how was it?
all of the things. I won't start from the very, very beginning, but I will give a little bit of context to like going into this race, and then I'll mainly talk about the race. And then I know we have a bunch of questions about like training and during the race and before the race and all that kind of stuff. So we can get into those a little bit later. But just to set the stage a little bit, I was not a runner before 2020, and I turned into a runner because of 2020. Before that, I tried to train for a half marathon during my undergrad, and I trained like an asshole. I hope that's okay that I can say that, Laura.
Yes, yes, yes.
I trained like an asshole, and I
Sorry,
really,
Taylor. I guess there is one child watching,
yeah,
but
sorry. But I didn't train right? Like I just didn't do it in a way that was like actually supportive of the training itself. I did it to lose weight, and I ended up injuring myself in undergrad, and then I was training for half. So I did that, and I concluded from this that I was not meant to be a runner. Like I was not made for it. I just could not do it. I was bad at it. My body got injured. I just kind of quit and just left it at that. And I didn't run like at all for probably like 7 years until 2020 happened. And then in 2020, obviously the gyms closed and all that kind of stuff. And before that, I had been powerlifting. So like if anyone's ever been in like kind of the powerlifting space, right? I'm not a serious powerlifter. I just did it for my own fitness and things. But like the thought is like, oh, like I don't need to do cardio, right? Like I'm just strength training and all this stuff. And that's kind of like the mindset that I had about it also. So I never ran at all. And then when the gyms closed, I got cabin fever and I had trails that were close to my house that I could literally just like run from my house and be up into the woods and run on those trails. And so I decided also around this time I had been seeing like Laura and Liz and all these other people that were trail running too. And so I kind of got like, okay, maybe this is something I can do, like at least get me out of the house, at least like help me with some fitness when I can't go to the gym. And so that's when I started. And I fell in love with it then because I really realized that I didn't like running in a way to punish myself. I liked running for the enjoyment of running, and running slow was like the thing that I really loved about trail running. Like I could actually just go out and like power hike and walk and like run when I could. And it was out in nature and I got to do all the things and see all the things. And I didn't have to put pressure on myself to be really fast or to burn calories or like all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I started that in 2020 and then eventually built up to running an ultra. I did not set out to do that from the beginning. I set out to kind of redeem myself for the half marathon that I failed to do in undergrad. And so I was trying to do a trail half instead. I ended up dropping from the first one that I registered for because I got COVID. I got the Delta variant like a month beforehand and it took me out for like weeks. So I dropped from that half marathon and then I finally redeemed myself in 2022 and I ran my first trail half in 2022. And I don't think I adequately mentally prepared for that race because it was very technical, but I finished that race and that was what I wanted to do. And so I kind of just built from that. And after 2022, I moved to Louisiana. So I had like this great trail system and like all these things when I lived in Virginia. And then moving to Louisiana, there's absolutely no trails here at all that I could go to. The biggest trail that we have is like a mile and a half long, right? Like there's not any trails. So I kind of decided like, oh, I'll just kind of like keep running sparingly, whatever. And then Laura convinced me to run a 30K. And then Laura convinced me to run a 50K. And then here I am. So that was kind of I guess like the build up or like the background I want you to have like before you understand like what doing in this race and everything like that.
Yeah.
So race day, like building up to race day, I was nervous for weeks because I live in Louisiana, right? I was mainly nervous because of the elevation change. So I live at basically sea level. I do not have any elevation and I never have any elevation really gained during my runs. And so that was the thing I was the most nervous about, was that I was going to get like altitude sickness when I got to Colorado. And so I had like all these grand plans to go a couple days early and maybe acclimate a little bit faster. And then my flight got canceled or on the day that I was supposed to come. I was going to come on Wednesday. My race was on Saturday. My flight got canceled. So I had to get up at like 3:50 in the morning that day just to get up at 3:50 the next morning. And then got to Colorado and actually like turned out that I really it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I definitely like made it worse than I thought than it actually ended up being and everything. And so leading up to race day, I was just mainly like, okay, I just like my only goal for my ultra was to finish it. So I wasn't like trying to aim for like a certain pace or like a certain time or anything like that. I just wanted to get to the middle point cutoff. So this race had one midpoint cutoff and then the end was a cutoff. And so I had to get 18 miles in by noon with a 7 a.m. start. So basically 5 hours to get 18 miles in. And after making that cutoff, then I would just have to run 13 more miles to the end of the rest of the race. So my only goal for like the entire race was I just have to make the midpoint cutoff. Because if I can make the midpoint cutoff, I can finish the race. And so that was like my only mentality going into this. And you can probably ask Laura. I think her and Allison were both a little concerned because they were like, what's your plan for all this? I was like, I don't know. I'm gonna figure it out. It's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, like
Yeah.
my carb strategy. I was like, I don't know. We'll just go into it. I was not as well planned as I probably should be, especially from somebody that's like in nutrition, right? Like I definitely should have been more prepared than I ended up being, but it all worked out and it was fine. So like kind of going into the night before, I was really nervous. Laura, I don't know if you could tell that I was really nervous, but like there was like some points I was just like like low key freaking out because I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna go run 30 miles in the desert tomorrow. Like it's a lot. But Laura and Allison definitely, I mean, they were the reason that I finished the race. I'm gonna be completely honest. Like they held me so well, like the day before, and then accruing me and everything like that too. Like they sat down and they were like, okay, here's your calculator. Like we'll just aim for this many an hour. Like it's fine. Packed all my snacks and everything the night before, and then set out the morning of. And Allison picked the jams, and Laura and Allison had an idea for like where they would go for crewing me, when they would show up, like that kind of thing. And we kind of vaguely planned out my pace the night before also. That was another thing that I didn't really have a lot of experience with, and I wasn't really sure how to pace myself because I had come from Louisiana, and I wasn't sure, like, okay, if I have this kind of climb, like how fast would I be? Because I don't know, because I'm in Louisiana, I don't have any data to back up what my potential pace would be. So I was kind of like, I don't know. I'm just gonna aim for 15 minutes a mile overall, right? Like that's all I have to go off of. So we kind of like vaguely did that. And then, got to the race morning, they dropped me off and everything. And it was like a beautiful morning, like kind of cool. Everyone was there. I like walk up the hill and they're playing like Noah Khan, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, like of course. Like I just love trail running because I feel like it's like the vibe is always really great. So I'm already getting the vibe, get to see the sunrise and everything like that. And then, I know I'm in the back of the pack, so I get to the back of the pack and we all set off and we're all going and everything like that. And the race started out with a really big climb. That was the very first thing that we did, which I'm kind of glad that we did because I got to blow up at the beginning rather than at the end. And so we come into that climb, and I was like, maybe assuming maybe I'd get like a 20-minute per mile pace or something like that. And I ended up getting like 16. So I was a little bit faster than I thought I was going to be coming into the climb and then coming down the other side. But I messed up because I drank my Tailwind too fast. If anyone doesn't know, Tailwind's like a carb supplement drink. I drank 2 scoops in like an hour, and my stomach really got messed up coming down out of the climb. And so I get into the first aid station, and Laura and Allison are there, and they like fill up my water, give me the snacks, all the things, and I'm off to the next part. And that part was supposed to be a really easy section because it's all flat and it's really nice and all those things, but I couldn't run it as fast as I wanted to because I had a lot of GI upset coming out of that. And so
Yeah.
I get finally back around. There were a couple of people actually that I met in that back section that had accidentally done it twice, or I met somebody that had done it 3 times. So like there's people that's like, I don't know where I'm going, like I don't know what to do, all this thing. And then I come out of that slower than I wanted to, but Laura and Allison gave me some scratch like recovery drink that had a little bit of protein and fat in it also, I think. Is that fat in it, Laura? Yes.
Yeah, I think just like a
Like a
gram,
little bit,
a
but
couple
it's like,
grams. Yeah.
yeah. But that like that brought me back to life. Like I don't think like that like recovered me completely from the tailwind screwing me up in the first part. So I breeze through the last section. I come into the midpoint cutoff with like maybe 20 minutes to spare. So I really was trying to like really book it after I had been really slow in that section that should have been really fast for me. But I'm able to like get to that aid station. I'm able to like take my time and refill my things. I get some acetaminophen from a somebody that was working the tent, because at that point I had been having, I left this out, but I had been having some issues with plantar fasciitis before my race, to the point that I had been going to like PT to help, because my calves are really tight, to help them like release so my plantar will calm down and all that kind of stuff. And so my feet are starting to hurt at this point. And so I get some acetaminophen from them, and I head out of the aid station, and I'm past the midpoint cutoff. So I know that I can finish the rest of the race. Which was great though. I was like, okay, if I can just get here, like I'm home free, this is fine, whatever. And so I get out of that midpoint cutoff. And then the back half of this race, there's like 7 point something miles in between the aid stations. And it's like midday at this point. So it's very hot. And I'm back with some runners and things like that are in that section with me. And a lot of us are lagging, a lot of us are running out of water, a lot of us are struggling. But I ended up running with this woman. Her name was Gay. She was in the 60 to 65 age group. Fast, like she was amazing. She was like super fascinating, like talked to me for like made the majority of the back half of the race. She had like double hip replacement, she had been running ultras forever and was out like just running, chilling. She had a friend that like dropped in a couple of times to say hi to her and like crew her as well. And we're on the back half of the section getting ready to come into the last aid station before the finish and pass like a couple of runners that are just really struggling. Like we passed one girl who was like sitting, she's like white because she's got like sweat dried on her. She's like white from salt. And we had all run out of water at that point, and she's like really struggling in that section. Like she was sitting down. We didn't have any water to offer her. She didn't have any water. And so we kind of had to be like, the aid station's close, like we'll tell them, and hopefully somebody that's behind us will also have some waters to get you like in the meantime. But we came into that aid station, and someone meets us as we're coming into there, and they're like, come on, the aid station's about to close. And we're like, okay, well, there's like a lot of people that are back here and we've all run out of water. Like we can't close the aid station yet. So like we're running around, and me and Gay are like getting crewed. Laura and Allison are there crewing me. And then she had a friend that was crewing her as well. So we get refilled. And I find out from Gay later that she had told one of the aid station workers about the girl that we've passed that was kind of sitting down and really struggling. And she was told that they couldn't help her, that she had to eventually get there. So I don't actually know what happened with her, but I hope that she got water and that she was fine in the long term. But we come out of that last aid station, and there's immediately another climb that's coming out of there. And that was actually the steepest climb, that is steeper than the first one. And so I get up to that with Gay, and we pass another runner that's like laid out like all the way across the trail because he's having like leg cramps. And so he's like sitting there. There's like a crowd of us in the back of the pack that are all sitting around him, like handing him salt tabs, like giving him water. And there happens to be like some other random like guy just like out there running on the trail. And we're like, hey, can you stay with him? And he's like, yeah, totally. Like, y'all go on. So I hope he's also okay. I don't actually know if he finished or not either. But I ended up also talking to this guy named Chris, which is ironic because my husband's name is also Chris. And he was also, it was his first ultra. He was running back there with Gay and I. We were the back of the pack kind of crew that ended up finishing the race together. And he was also really cool, had great energy and great spirit. Like we were all kind of together. We ended up like all taking like pictures at the very top where it's like overlooking, you can basically like look down, and that's where we had been running before. So it was like on the very, very top of the course. And then at that point, also like my feet are completely trashed, like especially my right foot. And coming down off of that top, you can like it's the worst because you can see the finish after you come down from the top, but you have to like do this to get down to the finish. So it actually takes a really long time to get there, even though you can see it. And so I'm just like, at this point, I'm walking. Like I've been walking for like miles, and I can't run. And it was during that like kind of downhill climb that I felt a blister pop in my right foot. And I was like, oh yeah, like this is this is bad. I could not, like, it was very, very painful, both with my plantar like fascia and the blister, and my left foot also had a blister. It was a lot. My legs were okay, but my feet were the part that really limited me. And so I get out of that, like I let the other people go a little bit ahead of me because I was holding them back at that point. And we get down like the turns to get down to the finish. And I did end up being able to run into the finish, which was really nice because I was afraid that I was not going to be able to do that. And Allison and Laura were there to greet me at the finish and everything. And I cried, and it was great. And I saw a lot of other people that were also crying. I feel like there's like that. I don't know. The back of the pack is also really special because I think a lot of us are just kind of like there to support each other when you're in a race like that. Like people are like, hey, are you okay? Like, do you need anything? Let's go together. Like, what are you doing? Let me distract you. That was a lot of like coming down that that last section before the finish. Like, that's basically what all my companions did, was like, hey, let's just keep talking and like distract ourselves from how much pain that we're in right now, kind of thing, which was great. And then, afterward, I took a bunch of pictures with Gay and really appreciated her for her companionship and everything like that. And yeah, the rest of the day was mainly spent horizontal and without shoes on because my blisters, I mean, they weren't super visible that day, and they slowly turned, like they were very large and like very like far in my feet. And so most of the day was kind of spent like recovering, eating all the things, and prepping Laura and Allison for their races the next day and everything like that. So a lot of hobbling around the house and being, like I said, horizontal and just not getting up and that kind of thing. But that's kind of my very general overview. I now realize I've been talking for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So
No, that was
definitely
great. That was great.
give time for questions now.
Yeah, I just kind of I was taking some notes as you were chatting just about like some points that I wanted to hit on from my perspective. So, you mentioned that like Allison and I were kind of like doing some math for you. And we were like, even prior to race day, like Allison and I were having these little like side chats about like, what do we need to do to like help Steph do this? And so Steph and I had run the Dead Horse 30K outside of Moab, Utah in November. So 5 months or so before Steph did her ultra. And so I was like pulling up that data and comparing like the time of that and the elevation of that and the vertical gain of that compared to like, because we knew like, if Steph makes it to 18 miles, like she's going to finish. And so I was like comparing like, okay, we did this 18K in this time and she's got longer and the vert is less, like she's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. So that was really, I think just a good point to like, have those like training races to see like how you perform in that race setting and like try and kind of mimic what you're going to be doing for your A race or your ultra. That's actually something that I'm preparing to do right now. In 2 weeks, I'm running my ultra, and it's just a preparation race for a longer race that I have like 3 months later, just so I can get a benchmark of like, where am I and like what do I really need to work on. So I feel like Dead Horse, even if you didn't know it at the time,
Yeah.
was a really good kind of
Surprise.
benchmark race for you. Um, the other thing, I mean, there's a couple other things, but you mentioned the scratch midway kind of saving you, and that is, sports nutrition is, we talk a lot about carbs, but anything really over like 3 hours is when you should be adding protein in, and that's like right where you were at that point. I remember like you cruise into that first aid station like
Yeah.
well before we were expecting you. And then
Yeah.
the second lap,
I was
Allison and I
like,
were like, where is she? Like, is she okay? Little did we know you had a little hurdy belly from some tailwind.
yeah, struggle.
Um, but um, yeah, it was really interesting, like from a crew perspective, some of the things that we kind of talked about, you, me, and Allison, on the back end, and some of the feedback that I sent to UTMB about that race was like, that runner who needed help and they said they couldn't help her. Which for those of you who are newer to the trail running space, that is rare. That I have literally never seen that before. I have volunteered at like a half a dozen trail races or more. And always on the medical side, like I volunteered at a 100-miler last year, and it was pretty similar conditions. It was hot out there for you guys. And this one that I volunteered at was very similar day. And we were actually running down the trail to meet runners, grab their water flask, run them back, fill them up with water, and then run them back out to runners. So that is more typical of what you would see at a trail race. I think that this experience of that aid station worker saying we can't help was really rare, which is good. It doesn't happen often, but they definitely, I got sent them some feedback about that. And then yeah, the finish line zigzag. It's funny you mentioned that, like, you can see the finish line, but you have to,
Yeah,
because
tempting.
so Steph wore these like bright red pink shorts, which was
Yeah.
amazing because like we could see her everywhere. And so Alice and I are like sitting at the finish line, just like staring up at this like ridge line of like shrubs. And every now and then you see like a little runner between some shrubs, and then they disappear. And then you see them like, a few minutes later, like coming through some other shrubs. And we're just like staring there, like looking like, where are those pink shorts? And then finally we see them, and then they disappear. Then you see them again, and then yeah, Allison had the video camera and screaming at you, I think, to run it home. But
Yes.
um yeah, that was it was super fun. So yeah, does anyone we have a whole list of questions that people submitted beforehand. Does anyone have any questions they want to add? maybe just in hearing Steph's story, like things that popped up right away, and we can make sure we answer those first. Feel free to like unmute yourself and or drop it in the chat.
I had a question. So you mentioned like that somebody was lost, like from your joint experiences on trail runs, like do you feel like it's common that people get lost or that trails aren't marked well, or like the race route's not marked well?
For this race, I think it was more of a testament to the runners themselves because they didn't prepare beforehand, because they weren't sure where they were going. So I made sure to like, I mean, even though I didn't prepare as much as I should have, I did look at like the trail map. This is where I go. This is where I go after this, like, you know, all of that kind of thing, and know the general flow of the course. These are more like mid-pack runners, like they should have been way faster than I was in the back, but they there was a lot of chaos because it was like you come out of the same aid station, and if it's your first loop, you go this way, and if it's your second loop, you go this way, and they were putting them at the same point. And so I think it was just like they didn't pay attention beforehand to what like they were supposed to do at that point, and then they didn't hear the directions, and so they ended up going the wrong way at that point. And I think it was just because of where like there were a lot of people moving right there, and I think that was mainly the issue with that.
Yeah, so
The
with that particular aid station was like the first and the second aid station. So you had people like, you had the front runners, like the people in the front of the pack were like heading out on their second loop from that aid station, while some people were still coming in from having not been there yet. And then others were like somewhere in between 1 and 2. So it was a pretty chaotic aid station. I do think they could have done a little bit better job of signage, but also like I really agree with Steph. I think that part of like runners' responsibility, and I tell this to all of my one-on-one clients, is like you need to know the course. You should look at the course. You should know where the aid stations are. You should know like, you know, and also like take the 3 seconds to slow down and like figure out where to go. Because we did see a couple people that were like running off in the wrong direction. I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like I said, there was somebody on there that was on their third lap. They were only supposed to be 1. So like you didn't listen the first time, and then you didn't listen the second time. So like that it's kind of your own fault. You know what I mean? Like that's not really the race fault, but yeah.
In general, I think if you're like aware enough, and do take the time to do your homework and review the course, like they're always pretty well flagged. I have like a couple of times in races gotten off course by like 10 steps and then been like, oh wait, there's not a flag, let me turn around. So you just have to be, you know, a little bit of situational awareness.
Good question though.
Yeah, great question. Okay, let's dive in to some questions. Okay, so Jen asked, and this was actually another question that was asked previously. So Kira asked this previously, and then Jen just asked this. What is the longest distance that you raced prior to doing the ultra, and how long between those?
So I kind of gave this overview in my like background. I did the trail half first in 2022, and then that was like May of 2022. So I had like basically like a year and some change. And then I ran that 30K in November with Laura. And so there was, I think I ran that in May, and that was in November. So like almost like a year and a half in between my half and my 30K. And then for my 30K, it was just what, like 5 months or something like that. But when I knew I was going to run the 30K very early. And so I started training for that very early. I did not start training for that like 12 weeks out. Like I started training for that last April so that I would have a base. And once I ran the 30K, I was kind of like, if I'm going to run a 50K, like I need to do it now because I'm already trained for this 30K distance. And I get to train during the winter in Louisiana, which is much better than training during the summer in Louisiana. So that was the longest distance that I had done before the ultra distance.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really important point about like knowing where you live and what the training conditions are like. Like if you live in the South, like maybe don't pick an ultra in September because you're going to be running like all of your long run. I mean, unless you love the heat, but like most people I know that live in the South are like, that's Like it's the worst. Consider that like, so Steph doing a 50K in the spring allowed her to train through those cooler months. Whereas if she had chosen one in like September or October, she would be doing all of her long runs in the heat of the summer. So that's just kind of something to consider. Really planning out. And then I think another thing that this illustrates is like, that's a long timeline, and that's an appropriately long timeline. I think a lot of times people, ultra running is huge right now. Like, I wish I had this graph, but I saw in an ultra running magazine this like graph of like the growth of ultra running, and it is exponential. People are super into ultras right now, and for good reason. But also I think because of that, sometimes people try and like, they want to do an ultra and they want to do it now. And you really have to like respect the distance. I mean, you were regularly running for what, like 4 years before you did one. So I think that that's a really good illustration of like getting the solid base and building from there.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then another pre-race question that someone had, this was submitted in the question box. Lily asked, how did you choose which ultra to do for your first?
So that was definitely help with Laura. I like I said, we had ran the 30K in September. And we ran it with another Steph who she ran the 50K in November. And I was kind of like, okay, well, again, if I'm going to run a 50K, like I need to do it now. And so Laura kind of floated the idea of doing Desert Rats. And I was like, you know what, let's do it. So that there was really no like me picking my ultra. It was kind of like whatever was, suggested by Laura, but also like, it's fun to do it with friends, right? So like I was like, I'm not just gonna do some random one if I have the chance to do it with my friends, right? So I'm gonna do that instead. So there was little thought in which ultra I would do first. But honestly, like, I mean, there were definitely some things that I didn't like about this race in particular, like to the point, like, especially for Back of the Packers, like I don't know if I would recommend this race, but it also wasn't a bad race for me to do, like based on where I had to train, right? Like there was like 3,600 feet of elevation gain in this race, but like there are plenty of other ultras that have much, much more than that. So it was honestly like a good race for me to have done. Even though I had some issues with like the actual way the race was run itself.
Yeah, for sure. And the spoiler alert on that is that the other Steph and myself were both supposed to also run this 50K with Steph. And Steph Rossler forgot to sign up and it was sold out. And then I decided that it was too soon for me. So I chose one a little bit later and dropped to the half. But I think, I mean, ultimately I am happy with that decision. I think it enabled Allison and I to crew for you, which I think would have been more than running with you. And yeah, and again, like I think it was like the reason that I did push for this one is again it allowed, Steph and the other Steph lives in Mississippi. So would have allowed them to train through the winter. It's at elevation. I mean, it's like around 5,000 feet. So for Colorado, that's actually pretty low. And so it's not horrible for coming from sea level. And yeah, for a 50K, it's kind of at like the low end of vertical gain for sure. But yeah, we can.
For reference, the half that I did that half in Virginia, and that had the same elevation gain that my 30 or my 50K did. Again, I did not mentally prepare for that half as much as I should have. I should have, like, looking back on it, I'm like, wow, you really just trusted everything going into that race. But that had like over 13 miles, a similar elevation gain to what I had over 30 miles. So like definitely keep in mind like elevation gain to mileage amount also whenever you're trying to like pick your race.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and now we're gonna dive into some training questions. So Mickey asked, what was your average weekly mile during your training blocks?
So overall average, like I tried to like calculate this out. If you just put everything together, it's like 20 miles a week, but that's without taking into account that like some weeks were lower and some weeks are higher, right? So I did follow Alyssa Lennox training program. I have an old copy of Endure, so I use like that marathon training plan and just adapted it to do 30 miles instead of 26. But really started, again, I started for my 30K in April, and I spent a couple months that were just getting miles under my feet. Like I wasn't actually like, I'm following a training plan for the 30K at that point. Like I was just like, let's go on X amount of runs per week and try to build up to like 10, 15 miles a week, that kind of thing. And then I think probably around like August is when I really started training for the 30K itself. And I built up to that. And then 30K is 18 miles. And then after that, I took some break. And I think I actually took like almost until January off, like not completely off, but like I was not like actively training, and then started back in January. But because I had built the base up to the 30K, I was able to start higher for the 50K training. And so my highest peak was I did a 22-mile run, was my highest run that I did. And I think the mileage that week was around like 35. And I had actually meant to peak higher and have a little bit more miles under my feet, but I was really bad about doing my Sunday runs that were after my long runs. And so I didn't get quite as many miles under my feet as I wanted to, but I was really happy with the peak that I did because I actually happened to be traveling that week and I was at home visiting my family. So I was able to do some trail, even though it was like not, it's like a bike trail, right? Like it's like flat gravel, whatever. But I was able to get like some miles that were not on pavement, and that ended up being my peak week, which is really nice actually. So I was very happy that I was able to like travel, but also still hit my peak week at the same time and like actually hit all my runs. So in the middle of my training, I'd say I was averaging over 20, and then like slowly building up to then going over 30 for my peak week.
Yeah, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of answers this next question that I had written down. Jen, I don't know if this is you who asked this in the question box, but someone asked how long did you train? So that answers that one as well.
Yeah.
And then Jenna wanted to know, how do your short runs compare to long runs in terms of time when prepping for your ultra? So what was, typical week of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I meant to do a little bit of speed work, and I did a couple of speed workouts where I was just trying to see if I could get slightly faster. And I did end up, I mean, when I say I did a couple of speed runs, it was like 2 or 3, right? Like we're not talking like I did a lot of speed runs, okay? So I meant to do more than I did, but I did end up actually getting faster than I thought I was going to, just because I had spent so long building my aerobic base up into the 30K, and then having hit the 30K and then keeping going. Like looking at, I mean, I know obviously like watches are not like the best for like giving you actual accurate measures of fitness and everything like that, but like just looking at some of the trends on that I get through like my watch that I wear every day, like I could just see myself getting fitter as I was doing it. And so like some of my runs, I ended up getting around like 13 minutes. Some days that it was my like zone 2 runs. I spent most of my time doing zone 2 runs where like I was trying to keep my heart rate under 150, and like that was 99.9% of my runs. I did not really do any that I was like training to be fast. I think I left out though. I did do a road half marathon. I left this out. I did do a road half marathon before my 30K. I totally forgot about that. And I was very surprised that I was able to get a sub 12-minute mile for that half marathon, which is very surprising because I was not running that beforehand. But because like race day, you get all the stuff. So like definitely remember that you get the adrenaline on race day. But yeah, my road runs during the week that were shorter were around like 13.5 minutes per mile. And then I tried to keep that pretty consistent with my long runs. And so because they were all zone 2, ended up being around that for my long runs as well. But again, keep in mind, like all of my runs are flat. And I think like most of my elevation, like maybe 100 feet of elevation gain, right? So I was able to run like very consistently because the road, I was running on a very consistent like pavement, right? So that was another thing to keep in mind too. It's different than like somebody like Laura that's training on trail all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's just a really good point to drive home. I think you know, I am super, super lucky, very grateful where I live. I literally can run down my driveway and into a massive, like I can probably run a 50K from my house. And that is rare. And I realize that, and I'm very grateful for that. But I love this like illustration of like, you can train for an ultra in Colorado, I mean, it's Colorado desert, in the flatlands and the pavement and the sidewalks of Louisiana. I think that that's awesome. You know, I think a lot of the times I hear so many times people will ask, like, how do I train for elevation? How do I train for vert? And this is a great example that like you do the best you can, and the way that you train for elevation. So elevation being how high are you above sea level, whereas vert is like the gain and loss throughout the race. And the way that you train for elevation is just getting as fit as you can. And so that's exactly what you did. You spent a lot of time building a really, really solid aerobic base that enabled you to take that fitness 5,000 feet higher and still perform well. So I think that's a great, if anything, my flatlanders here, you can do it.
For sure. And like going off of that too, because I want to mention this as well, like training for my 30K, I did run during the summer and it sucked. It sucked big time, right? Like if you are somebody that lives anywhere that gets hot, right? Desert, if you're somewhere it's like living, you know, even like the mid-Atlantic region, like it gets hot during the summer and it sucks. But at the same time, like it was also really cool to watch myself get fitter even before I was like training for the 50K, like just doing for the 30K, watching myself get heat adapted by like when I started out my runs in the summer, like I could not get my heart rate under zone 4 for anything. I would like run walking and my heart rate would be in zone 4 versus like over the time that I trained during the summer, by the time I ended, like I was able to keep zone 2 and it was like 95 degrees and 90% humidity and the dew point's like 76, right? Like the heat adaptation that occurs is another form of a stimulus that also can help with your fitness. Like, and it's in a different way, but it's definitely something that like you can also adapt to. And then that's like the one advantage that I had going into this race, because like I said, it was hot. It was like 80 degrees. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing, right? Like this is fun. I'm out here cruising, like barely sweating versus like other people that are like absolutely dying because they've been in the winter, right? So like it's different stimulus and different adaptations for different things. And even if you are somewhere that you can't get the same stimulus as what your race will be, like there's other ways to get a stimulus that will also matter to your fitness.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because like I ran the half the next day and it was way less hot than your day. And I was like dying because you know, coming into this like really hot desert race from like the mountains in Colorado in the winter. And I was like, I am not okay.
And most people were doing that, right? Like everyone that trained for that trained during the winter. And so like it's like the first warm day and everyone else is like, oh my God. I'm like, this is fine. Because it's been like 80 degrees here in Louisiana for like weeks now. So,
it was rough. Went from like winter to like summer overnight. I was like, this is not all right. Okay. Sarah wanted to know, how do you fit in the training time you need and still have a life? To clarify, a social life. I feel like consistent free weekends for long runs is hard.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think with me, my biggest thing was my midweek runs, because it would like, especially training for my 30K leading up to the 50K, like it's hot, right? So I have to plan my runs around the heat, and it was either get up really, really early or run really, really late. And so that was like the hardest part for me during the week. For weekends, if I knew I was going to be doing something that was social, I would make it a point to get up very early and run and like make sure that I was done and like had time to recover by the time I was out doing things. So I planned a lot of things for the afternoon, that kind of thing. Or if I had to absolutely change it, I would change which day that I did my long run. So I'd either do it on a Friday or a Saturday so that I would be free for the event. And I know that of course requires like some flexibility and like some privilege to be able to like take Friday off and go on your long run, right? But if you're able to do that, or even like ultimately, like if you need to split it up, like you're still getting some that stimulus regardless, right? Like, yeah, it would be optimal to get the long run, but like if you can't do it, you can't do it. And so just doing what you can is better than not doing it at all. So like I definitely want to say that also.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it is hard. And I was very lucky too, because as I was doing some of my training runs, I had a friend who she's training for a half marathon. And like, I mean, she's much fitter than me baseline. So like we ended up running together a couple of Saturdays. So like I'd have like, okay, like we're gonna meet up at this time. So I had an accountability. I'm gonna get up at 6 and like go run. And then we like run together and then go get coffee and like hang out. Right. So there's like a little bit to be said about having some kind of social support too. That's kind of helpful for that, or at least like having people that are willing to be flexible, like not doing something in the morning, but maybe doing something in the evening, or if you have the flexibility to do your long run in the evening versus the morning, like making it work. Again, doing whatever you can is better than doing nothing. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good point of like, it certainly does. It takes a lot of time. I mean, if you're training for an ultra, you're looking at like multiple weeks of like 6 to 10 hours of just running. That doesn't include strength training. That is 6 to 10 hours a week of running for like weeks. It's a part-time job. Because not only are you running that time, but then you have to think about like your prep and your driving to the trailheads and your recovery time. But yeah, I mean, being flexible. I have one of my clients who she just emailed me last week and was like, hey, can I move my long run to Friday? Like my husband misses me. So we did that. And like, she has the flexibility again, the privilege and the flexibility in her schedule to mix that around with work. So she's just doing her long run on Friday. So now she has this whole weekend, to spend with her family and yeah, and mixing it up, doing part of your run in the morning and part of the run in your evening, if you can, and if you have to. So yeah, being flexible is the biggest. Okay, and then Savannah, who is on this call, and is running the Back of the Pack Ultra in November along with Taylor. She said, you talked about wishing that you had done more to strengthen your feet. Is there anything specific that we can do or exercises to strengthen our feet? And is it just time on trail? And I also, along with this, if you can answer the shoe thing, because I know that you were like debating what shoes to wear in your run. And as I was reflecting on this, I was just curious if you would have made a different decision, knowing how your feet feel right now.
that's a good question. Savannah, to answer your question, I think it's strength training in general. Listen, do as I say, not as I did. Actually, strength train, I was very bad at it. I'm very lucky because I have a very large base for strength training. And so I've been able to like maintain a lot of the strength that I had beforehand, because like I've been powerlifting since like 2016, I think. So like I have a very strong base, but I have not been consistent with my strength training for like since before my 30K, right? So like it's been a while. If I had to do it again, like I would definitely make sure that I did more strength training, doing like balance, any kind of moves that incorporate balance or like single leg movements, I think would have been really helpful for my feet, because like, especially with balance, like you're using the muscles of your feet to really like hold yourself and like be able to balance and everything. And I think that would have helped a lot. It would have helped if I had been able to get some trail time or to vary the surface that I was running on, because I think pavement, I think, was another thing that kind of contributed to it. But at the same, like I couldn't have done that. So it's kind of like moot point to think about, like, wish I had done, because I couldn't have done it regardless. If you're able to get some trail time, like I recommend it.
Oh my God.
What was that? Oh,
that was just someone logging on.
You're good. But if you're able to get some trail time, I definitely recommend it, even if it's like one run a week, one run a month, like whatever, like just to get the experience if you've never done it before. But I definitely think that the strength training itself would have tremendously helped. And that's one of the things that, like, now that I'm post race, I haven't actually run since my race, but I've been to the gym now twice to like build back my strength training. And that's something that I'm going to incorporate moving forward. As I'm trying to do more of like a hybrid thing where I keep like 10 miles a week and also strength train so that I can keep that aerobic base to an extent.
Yeah.
And as far as shoes goes, I ended up running my 30K or my 50K in my road running shoes, which actually like turned out to be not that big of a deal. I thought that it was going to be a big deal because I thought that I would need trail shoes, and I was more worried that it would be very slippery because I didn't have the same grip that a trail shoe would have. But because I had had so many issues with my feet before the race, I decided to just use the shoe that my feet were familiar with and go about that and not change anything up before the race or during the race so that I wasn't introducing something that could have injured me further. And I am glad that I did it. If I had had some time to get acclimated to a trail shoe, I think I would have kind of rather used a trail shoe. I did end up falling at one point. But I think the section I fell on was slick rock, and I don't think the trail shoe would have helped that anyway. So like I don't think that that would have mattered, but I do think it would have given me a little bit more grip in some sections. But since I wasn't acclimated to a trail shoe, I didn't want to risk it. So I just did my regular old road running shoes and rolled up and ran just as well, I think, if not better than if I had done like changed up my shoe or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm gonna mute someone there. There we go. Yeah, I think that that's a really great point. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day. It's the Some Work All Play Swap podcast. This is by a running couple, David and Megan Roche. They live in Boulder, Colorado, and they are like they coach the best, most elite athletes. They themselves are also very elite. And they were talking about how they have been running trail races in their road shoes. Because road shoes are, I mean, for them, they're faster, they're more responsive, they get more energy through the shoe in order to propel themselves forward. But I think it's a really good point of like, again, you don't need the perfect gear. You don't need to like always train on trail, like use what works for you. And then back to Savannah's question, I think in general, I always encourage people, like, if you can, try and get at least one trail run a week. If you're training for a longer trail race. Again, I'm super lucky where I live. But even then, like I do all my speed work on pavement. I usually do one treadmill workout a week. And then I'm really only doing like like maybe 50% of my training on trails. And then, yeah, just like what, like Steph said, like a lot of single leg, like skater jumps and pogo hops and box jumps and things like that, to really get that like plyometric strength in. Okay, we're probably going to go a little bit over 7. If you have to hop off, that's fine. I am recording this and I will send it. But now we're going to kind of get into the race day questions. There's about 6 of them. I think we'll run through them pretty quickly, but we'll do that and then we'll kind of wrap with any additional questions. So, Steph, Carly wants to know, how many days did you carb load prior to the race?
Well, I think I spoiled this a little bit because, as you all know, I did not prepare as well as I should have. And so I was kind of just like, oh, I'll see some extra carbs. It'll be fine. And at the time, I wasn't really like tracking my food either. So I was just kind of like, oh, like, let me hit like 2 bowls of cereal as my snack, like that kind of thing. And just kind of like free balling and just doing whatever I could. So like we got to like the Airbnb for the race, and we had like calculated out how much like I should have eaten for my carbs, and it was like what, like 600 grams or something like that. And I was like, well, this is an insane amount of carbs. Yeah. Like there's no way that I'm going to be able to do it. So I tried to stick to like just as much as I could possibly do for at least like a couple of days beforehand. Like even before I got to Colorado, I was like, let me just eat a couple of gummy worms, or let me have an extra bowl of cereal, or like, let me choose the carb option rather than the option that has more protein and fat in it. And so I kind of freeballed it more than I should have. Again, as somebody, especially it's in nutrition, I should have actually had a plan going into it. But I definitely appreciate Laura and Allison for helping me through the carb load and feeding me plenty of carbs beforehand.
Yeah. Again, another like really great example of like, you don't have to have it all figured out. This is something that I tell my athletes when I send them their like race week email. I say there's 2 ways that you can go about a carb load. And one way is every time you eat a carb, double it up. If you're having a serving of rice, eat 2. If you're having a bowl of cereal, pour an extra cup. It doesn't have to be super scientific. If you want it to be scientific, the equation that I use, and it's going to be really confusing to talk about, but essentially you take your body weight in kilograms, you multiply it by 8, and that gives you your daily carb rate. But then what I do, that's what you're supposed to have for like 3 days prior. It's a massively high number. So what I do is I take that number and multiply it by 3. So that's your total grams of carbs for 3 days. And then I divide that number by 5. So essentially I'm taking a 3-day carb load and I'm stretching it out into 5 days. So you're not smashing like 600 carbs a day for 3 days. It works out to be, generally somewhere more around like the 500 carbs times 5 days. So that is the equation. It's body weight in kilograms times 8. No, body weight in kilograms times 8 times 3 divided by 5 or something like that. I don't know. If you have questions, send me a DM and I'll do the math for you. But otherwise, just add extra carbs. Okay, now you have like a bunch of questions that all come from Danny, who, Danny, I'm sad that she's not on this call, but she's running the 50K with me in a couple weeks. Okay, thank you, Carly. I'm glad that made sense. Okay, so Danny wants to know, what was something that you were surprised by?
I was very surprised by how well my legs held up. Because I did not strengthen as much as I should have, and coming from a very flat environment, I thought my legs were going to be absolutely trashed, and they weren't, which was like very surprising to me. Like if my feet would have been fine, I think I would have been much faster than I was, but my feet is the part that slowed me down. And so that was one thing that really surprised me going into that race, was like how well I actually held up. And I think that just speaks to something too of like, afterward, you just like so, I don't know, I was so mind blown of like how resilient the body is. Like, even though I hadn't strength trained for so long, like I still had like the strength and the skill to be able to like climb and descend and do all the things, even though I hadn't trained as well as I wanted to for those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, I feel like I keep saying this, but again, just a testament to like, you don't have to have like a perfect training cycle. You don't have to train on terrain that is exactly like where you're going to be racing. Like, it's really just how big of a base of fitness can you get in order to complete what you're doing. So I think that's super awesome. Race day, Danny also wants to know, what's a strategy you use that helped you, that you feel like, did you have any strategies like to help you get to the finish line, or mantras or anything like that?
No, that's a good question. I hadn't had any when I set out, and my only goal was to get to the midway finish. I was like, I just gotta run a 30K and then I'll just be fine for the rest of the half marathon that I have to do after this. And that was like all I was really thinking about. And so like during it, I had my killer playlist going. I had a new playlist that Allison had given me, so I had something fresh. And I didn't really ever use anything. I did depend on the people that I ran with. Like, we all kind of depended on each other and like got each other through all the things. Like there was a point like in that back section where we're at the very, very top of the race and we're like looking down at everything. I'm afraid of heights. So like I'm walking and I'm like, oh my, like I'm literally like doing this so that I don't like, because the trail is here and then the cutoff is like here. So you're like very close to the edge of like a cliff. And so I'm like literally doing this and I'm like walking with my hands out, and Gay is behind me and she's like, are you okay? Like, are you going to go down? And I'm like, no, I'm just scared of heights. And then ahead of me, the Chris guy that we were running with too, he's also up there like freaking out. And he's like, I'm also scared of heights. We got this. And we're just like walking through it. So I ended up like relying on them a lot. And then as I was coming down to the finish, and I was kind of lagging behind because my feet and my blister had popped and I was like really suffering at that point. And I just like kept repeating myself, like, you did it, you did it, you did it. Like, just get to the finish and you got it. So I did end up actually using a mantra for that little last bit, getting through that pain cave of my feet. So
yeah, for sure. And then Danny, again, what was something that you would do differently besides strength train?
That's definitely the biggest thing. I think something that I would do differently, I think, is also like plan out my race nutrition a little bit and not like full blast, like chug tailwind. I think that was the other thing that if I had not done it, wouldn't have slowed me down as much. Test out your sports nutrition before you actually do your race. I have used Tailwind in the past, and I've used Tailwind and I've been just fine. So it was more of, I think, the rate at which I was consuming the Tailwind that really messed me up this time. But like, if you want to try something, like you should try something. Or if there's something that you've used for all of your long runs, like you should keep using that thing, right? Like test out the things that you want to use during the race and use your long runs to test those things out. So like if you've never had something before and you want to try it, you should try it out. And like also test like the amount of food that you are going to eat like during your race, like test it during your long runs. Like it might seem ridiculous to just constantly be shoving food in when you're going on like a 13-mile run, but like if that's what it takes to train your stomach, especially if you have like, I have a pretty good stomach generally, but if you don't have a good stomach, like do as much as you can in your training, because eating is also training
for sure. Yeah, I say this a lot, like, you know, you're training your muscles and your heart and your legs and your lungs to run, and you have to train your gut in order to sustain all of that too. And generally speaking, when we look at endurance nutrition, 30 grams of carbs is like the starting point per hour. But really, when you get into these longer distance races, you want to be closer to like 60 plus grams of carbs per hour. I know for me right now, you know, again, like I'm kind of a couple weeks behind Steph, where I'm getting ready to do my ultra in a couple of weeks. I'm at like 65 grams of carbs per hour, and I feel really good at that. So I'm actually going to bump it up and probably do like 75 to 80 on my next long run. But like Steph said, like you really want to be practicing with the food every single long run you have. Everything that's going to be longer than like 60 to 90 minutes, you should be practicing your food, practicing the timing of your food, what you're eating, what flavors you like, what variety of things. Some people like gels, some people like solid foods, some people like salty foods, and really like getting a lot of that. That is part of the training process. Eating is part of training, and figuring out what works for you is part of training. And then taking very detailed notes so that the night before the race, when Allison and I ask you what you're going to eat, you have an answer. I mean, although you did still crush it, I think we did after the fact add up all of your calories. And I wish I had saved that in my tracking app, and I deleted it. I didn't want that to be my data. But I think we ended up determining that you were at like 65 grams of carbs per hour. It was an insane amount of gummy bears.
Yes. If I ever eat a gummy worm again, it will be like, but honestly, like that was such a good fuel, because you only have to have like 5 to have like 25 grams of carbs. So like it's so packable. Like I was like stuffing them in my pocket, and like so I'd like reach down and like put one in my, right. So I'm not digging through my pack, like doing all the things. Like it turned out really well. And like honestly, like if I have to do a long run anytime soon again, like I'm still gonna go back to gummy worms, because it was just so like easy and so good.
It was 2 bags of Troy
bags. I ate 2 whole bags of Troy gummy worms during my
2 bags. I love that. On top of like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a bunch of Tailwind, a bunch
2
of
things of scratch,
hydration, scratch recover,
as many like potato chips as like
pretzels. Yeah. It was a lot. Okay, and then Janie asked, which you've already kind of answered, how did your feet hold up? Do you have any blisters? Yes. How are all of your toenails?
My toenails are intact. My toenails are fine. That was always the question that has been asking me. My toenails are great. My heels are not great. I literally sent like a video to Laura and Allison earlier today that was like, do y'all want to see something really gross? And like showed them my blister currently. My right foot one is like starting to like the skin underneath has healed, and now it's starting to like come off, and it's like the whole back of my heel. So it's like you can literally like stick your finger in, it's like all the way under my heel basically at this point. It's really gross. But it's like I did not realize it was that big until now that it's healed, and I'm like, okay, wow, like that was actually a very, very large blister. So
if you guys want to see, you can message Steph on Instagram.
Yes, I can send you a gruesome picture of it. And because of that, I plan to run this week, but I was like, I didn't want to damage the new skin under my blister yet. And I wanted to give it some time to like fully heal. So I haven't run yet after my ultra, but the plan is to do one this weekend after now that it's like coming apart. So
I have a question.
Mhm.
When's your next ultra?
So I'm super sad because I really wanted to do the back of the pack ultra in November. But I have a like science meeting that day, so I'm not able to do it. I really want to do one next spring. So that does involve still maintaining my aerobic base during the summer, but it's better than training for like doing the whole peak and everything during the summer also. So Laura, if you want to do one, maybe Pacific Northwest in the next summer, I'm down for that. So
yes. Very cool. So your plan is to get back to strength training, maintain your base 10 to 15 miles per week, and then probably in the fall, once it cools down, you'll start to ramp up again for another spring ultra.
Yeah, that's the general plan, at least for right now.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions before I ask my final question? Okay. If you had to distill all of your knowledge and your experience into like one main advice for someone who's running their first ultra, what would you say?
Can I give like a list of 3 things?
Yeah.
Okay. Do it scared. I was terrified before my race. I honestly, if you're not terrified, I'm worried for you. You might be a little overconfident, right? Which was me in my first race. I was overconfident because I was not scared. And then now I'm like, okay, yes, like there is a healthy dose of fear with this big of a mile like event kind of thing. And I think that it's fine to feel that. Do it imperfectly. If you're waiting for it to be perfect, it never will be, and you'll never actually get there. Like it does not need to be perfect. And then do it for you. Like make it something that is fun, make the process of it fun. And if you can really watch yourself like get that like because there is a bit of mental toughness that comes with that, and it's really just like, okay, I'm doing the thing and I'm gonna do the thing, like, and that means the whole process before that. And I'm honestly, there's more mental toughness that you can gain in ultra training from the process than the actual race itself. Like everyone always talks about like the mental toughness it takes to get through the race. Like, no, that's the easy part. Like the hard part is actually training for the race. And if you can make the process fun and make it something that you enjoy and like do actually make it fun, right? Like that's the whole point. Like we're not just doing this to do it. Like I mean, maybe you are, but like there's also an aspect of that that's enjoyable, or I hope there is for you. And so if you can do it for you and do it in a way that is fun, you'll enjoy the process and you'll get to race day and you'll also enjoy the race itself. So those are my 3 things. Do it scared, do it imperfectly, and do it for you.
I love that. And that's perfect for me because I am terrified for my ultra. And it's gone wildly imperfect.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. Like you think about, again, like you're running 6 to 10 miles a week for weeks on weeks on weeks on weeks. And then race day is like what, 12 hours at most. So it's like, you have to find a way to enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, like you said, like do it for you because you're going to spend a hell of a lot more time training than you are actually racing.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone always asks like, how do you develop the mental toughness for it? And honestly, like the training, like you will develop it through the training itself, and you don't have to like, I don't think you have to set out to be like, I'm going to develop my mental toughness today, like all the biohacky bros and everything. Like just doing it and like being in your own head, listening to your same music, running the same road over and over and over and over and over again, like that is the mental toughness training that will actually like help you with race day.
Yeah. All those Louisiana sidewalks.
For sure. Running the same loop that like 7 times in order to get my long run in. Yeah, that was
that'll do it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steph. This was so awesome and I think super valuable for everyone who is getting into ultra running. I think it's just so cool. It's been so fun, like, from a friend perspective, of course, to like watch your journey and be there. And I can't wait for your next one, or our next one rather. And yeah, you know, if anyone has any follow-up questions, I think if you're on this call, you're probably familiar with Back of the Pack. And this is a community that essentially is just geared towards providing education, inspiration, connection, and coaching for Back of the Pack trail runners. We're just really out here to like encourage people to do hard things, to do it at their own pace. You know, like Steph said, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to like live in the mountains of Colorado to train for these things. You can do them where you're at. You can do them at the pace that you're at. And we're just really here to encourage that. So thank you, Steph, for embodying that spirit and for sharing your story. Feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a direct message. I'm sure Steph would be happy to answer questions as well. I will send out this recording. If you are coming from EPN, we will post the recording. This recording will be available everywhere. And yeah, that is it.
Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate getting to hang out with y'all.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much, Steph.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Bye. Stop recording. Oh my God. I don't know how to start recording. Stop here.